Okay, so welcome back to Dreadnought Woodshop Live. Um, you might notice that the view looks a little different today. Namely, I'm not standing in front of the lathe. Um, I'm going to be trying something different today, so it might be a little bit clunky. I have the camera set up around my table saw, and I'm going to share with you, according to the title, I'm going to share with you a little bit about making a segmented vessel over the course of the next couple of weeks. For those of you who don't know, this is an example of a segmented vessel. And I'm not going to be making this one in particular. This one's made out of hickory and sapele and a little bit of curly maple up here at the top, right? I made this a couple of years ago, and I wanted to I need to make another segmented vessel. My good friend Kim Reddick, he was also my chiropractor for a time. He passed away, and life is busy, and I didn't find out about it until late. But I still wanted to present something in memorial for his wife and family. So I'm going to be making this segmented vessel for his family. So. Anyway, like I said, I'm over here on the other side of the shop. This is the messier side. I would have liked to have cleaned it up, but who got time for that? So before I get cracking on this, I wanted to share with you that I will be on the week of October 5th through the 9th. I don't know if I'll be able to do the live show because I'm going to be doing a show at a tool show in South Carolina in Columbia at Man Tool. If you happen to be in the area, feel free to stop by and say hello. It's going to be on Tuesday and Wednesday, which would be the 6th and 7th, I'm pretty sure. If I'm wrong, I'll put the correction in the notes for the show. So anyway, first of all, I have all these to make the, wait, hold on. I had an extra board around here as an example. So one nice thing about doing segmented turning is that you don't have to have big pieces of wood to make a big vessel or a bowl or whatever. You can actually make those things out of flat boards. Okay. So what we'll do, well, what I've already done is I went ahead and I cut a bunch of maple boards into strips so that we can cut the segments and start to assemble the rings. And hopefully today what we'll get through is we'll get through using the wedgie sled to cut the segments and maybe even start to glue them up. And then I don't know exactly how this is going to go. That's why in the description, in the title, it says segmented vessel part 1 of several, because I'm not sure how long it's going to take. But I wanted to take you guys through it with me in case you haven't done it before and show you how easy it is. Now, I do my segmented pieces and I don't really plan them. There's a lot of people who do a lot of calculations and different things like that, and I just don't do that. So I'm going to go through my process. Feel free to try it that way, or you could be like some of the other folks and go through all the measurements and charts and formulas and all that kind of stuff and do it. Either way, it gets it done. But first, I'm going to change the camera view, and I'm going to talk about some of the parts of the jig that I've made. And there's plans for it online at I think it's wedgiesled.com. I'll have to look that up and maybe put that in the show notes as well. So let's see. Let's get this out of the way. Probably should take this inside so it doesn't get damaged. My wife would kill me. Alright. So basically what I have here is this is my wedgie sled. And the wedgie sled is nice because the wedgie sled sets the angles for you, and it pretty much guarantees that you can get a ring that is relatively gap free. For some reason, my wedges aren't out here. Yeah, here we go. So this is my wedgie sled, and these are the wedges. And these wedges are what set the jig at the proper angle to cut a variety of different numbers of segments. Like this one's 32, 24, 48, and 16. The 16 one is the one that I use most often. And basically what happens is you select your wedge, and what you do, what I found is you just square up the end of the angle, the end of your wedge with the edge of the sled, and then you can set this spot. Well, let me undo this so I can show you how this thing works. So basically, you set this up square with the edge here. You can set. It doesn't have to be square with the edge. As a matter of fact, if you were to set it like that, where it's definitely not square with the edge, what would happen is your segments would go together and they go in kind of a spiral. But usually I just set it straight for your basic segments, and you just set it straight with the edge there and lock down this bottom fence. And then to set the top fence, what you do is you basically move this around until you have no gaps here. Actually, let's see. Move this up so you can see it. Okay. So basically, it's a little clunky because I'm still working on the camera placement and things out here. But basically what you do is you slide this up and you basically set it so that there's no space between the fence and your wedge. And once you have that, you go ahead and lock that down. And your angle is now set. Whether it's 16, 32, 24, there's a variety of wedges available for a variety of different numbers of segments per ring. Now, you might notice that my zero clearance insert looks a little odd. This is a ramp. So what happens is when I'm cutting these segments, you don't want them piling up behind the blade because they could move back to the back and catch a tooth and be thrown at you. So what this does is as I cut these pieces off and I keep cutting, right, the ramp pushes them off to the side so that I can safely continue to cut these wedges, because we cut quite a few, because each ring, depending on which wedge you select, could be anywhere from 16 to 48, or even I've seen people do 96 ring segment rings. So there could be quite a few pieces, and you want to get them away from the saw, and you really don't want to have to keep, cut a few and stop and move them, and cut a few and stop and move them in the interest of being safe. So this ramp really helps out. And all it is I just took a piece of pine and I cut an arbitrary angle on the edge here and just screwed it into my zero clearance insert. And this is the zero clearance insert that I used strictly for segmenting. Now this is my depth stop. And this is something that I made, something I designed. It's pretty simple. So basically what you have is a tenon of sorts, and then I have a dado on the other side. I don't know if that's called a tenon, but either way. And these two pieces fit together, and it slides very nicely. And I just set a carriage bolt in the end here, and this piece is roughly the width of my miter slots, so that when I put it in, it'll stay put. And this is set up so that I can adjust the length of my segments. Something else I use this for is a thin rip jig. So if I needed to rip thin strips, I can set this up, and well, actually, if I was doing that, I would set it up on this side, and I would set it for whatever thickness of wood I want, and then I'd set this up, and obviously I'd be running it against the fence, but I would set it up against here, and then this would be safely out of the way, and I could go ahead and rip the strips, and I'd move my fence over, rip a strip, move my fence over, rip a strip, using this as a reference base. So that's just a nice little bonus from putting this together. So now we can talk about our materials. You may notice that I have a bunch of these little pieces here that I was playing with earlier, explaining the ramp, and these are part of my pattern. These are going to go between the segments. Yeah, these are going to go between the segments. Make sure I got this right. Yeah, okay. For my feature ring. So we're going to set those aside for now. So I think I decided that I want this piece to be about 9 inches tall and about 6 inches in diameter. That's kind of using the rule of thirds. So, like I said, I don't do a lot of measuring and figuring before I do these. So basically, what I do is I have a bunch of scraps. This is a piece of plywood, a strip of plywood that was left over from the platform bed that I made a couple weeks ago. And so what I did is I cut this. All my strips are basically 1 inch wide. So I cut this strip 1 inch wide. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut 16 segments, and then I'm going to measure it and see how close I am to 6 inches. And I've done this before, so I have some idea of about how big these need to be. So I'm going to actually go over to the miter saw real quick, and I'm going to cut this down to a shorter length because my tripod over here, this thing is going to be hitting it at this length, because this thing is pretty long. It's going to be hitting the tripod every time I go to cut a segment. So I'm just going to mark that off, and I'm going to cut it down so that I can start showing you how to cut these segments. Be right back. Yep, I think that'll work. So the beauty of this jig is that these two faces, the magic happens between the complementary angles from this face and this face. So it almost doesn't even really matter how square your miter slot is to the blade, because the sled does all the work. So basically what we're going to do, which I almost forgot, is we have to mark this piece. Let me grab a Sharpie. Couldn't find the Sharpie, so it's going to be a pencil. So what you need to do is you need to mark one of the flat faces and one of the edge faces. The darker the better, because you want to be able to see this later. Which is why I didn't use a fine line pencil. Okay, so it doesn't matter how you orientate this when you put it on the sled. It doesn't matter if that strip is down, if this is in the back or in the front, it really doesn't matter. So now, you want to make sure that you get your blade height set. No need having extra teeth up. And then basically we're going to start cutting this, and I'm going to keep count of how many there are. And then once I get done cutting them, then I'm going to test it and see how big it is, if it's too big or too small, and then we'll work our way through it from there. So I don't know how loud this is going to be, but here we go. Oops, we lost the camera. Hang on. Alright, I think we're back. Okay, so I made that first cut, and now I'm going to set this up for the length of segment that I want. So, feeling pretty good with that right there. And this is going to guarantee that all my segments are the same length. So we're going to cut one, and then we're going to make the next cut, and the next cut, and the next cut, alternating between fences. Clearly we want to let that come to a complete stop before we go messing with these things. And like I said, this is my tester piece, so we're gonna see just how this measures up. You might notice that I have a rubber band on my wrist right here, and what that's for is I'm going to use that to hold my segments together so I can measure. So now that you have your segments cut, this is where those marks matter. So there's a mark here and a mark here. So what I want to do, usually what I do is I separate them so that I know which ones are which. So these have marks on the nose and these don't. And I did 16 segments, so I'm going to have 8 of each. Okay, so I got that. So now I'm going to alternate. As I assemble this, I'm going to alternate. I'm going to do one with the mark in and one with the mark out. So this one has the mark in. I'm going to leave this mark on the top, up, and then I'm going to put one next to it that doesn't have a mark on the outside, and I'm going to alternate as I make my way around this ring. See, split out, width, out, width, out. I think this is going to be small. I'm going to have to make these segments a little bigger. See that last one? Okay, so either I miscounted, which is very possible. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I did. I made one too many. So now I have that put together. Still having trouble with this camera thing. Okay, so I have that put together. So I'm going to take this rubber band and I'm going to. It's a little tricky because when you put this thing on here, it kind of moves all over the place. I made a little jig with nails and things to do it, but it just adds more time to the process, so I just don't anymore. I stretch that out. Alright, and there's so I got my rubber band on there. That gets trickier the bigger the rings get, by the way. And I have a couple of tips and things for that too. Alright, so let's see what we got. Alright. So as you can see, this is not really great plywood. This is some just above construction grade level stuff. And even with that, that is a pretty good, we got a pretty good fit on these rings. Okay, so let's get a tape measure or a ruler and see how did we do on size. Man, I think it's too rough. Actually, that's a little bit too big, right? Because I also need to add these in there at every section, at every junction. So I actually need to make it a little bit smaller. So we're going to cut another ring. So I'm just going to set this one aside and have at it one more time. Okay. So I just bring this up, and I want it to be a little smaller. So what I'm going to do is, this is another thing that I use pretty regular, is I use playing cards as shims. And I want to take off a fair amount, so I have about 5 cards there. And what I do is I place those cards, let's see, switch cameras maybe to show it better. Okay. So what I do is I take these cards and I slide those in there, and then that's going to take off that much space, that much length off of the segments. You don't want to take off a lot, but just a little bit. So I take off about 5 cards worth right there, and then I just loosen this up and then push it out. And that gives me that measurement where I want to be. This is also how I build my rings, so, which I'll show you that in a little bit. So anyway, let's continue. So this was my last cut in this direction. So my next cut's going to be on this face. Now you can see that this piece right here is definitely too short to cut 16 additional segments from. And so what you want to do is you want to pay attention to that the last one you do, the last cut you make, so that the first cut on the next piece will be in that same orientation. So let's go ahead and get cracking on that. I had to keep cutting these because I don't normally have a tripod right there, but for the purposes of sharing this on YouTube Live, I do today. So I'm going to mark this one again, just like I marked the last one. And so the last cut I made was up here, so that's going to be the first cut that I'm going to make for this piece. Alright, here's my jar of rubber bands. Probably my most important tool with segmented turning. So, I'm going to do the same thing again. Oops. Set these up, separate them out. It's a lot quicker to do it this way. I know it takes a second to separate them out, but it saves a good bit of time when you're trying to put them together. You're not hunting and picking around trying to figure out which ones are which. Alright, make sure I got enough. Okay. Alright, so now let's put this thing together too. Okay. Alright, stretch this rubber band out and get this thing put together so we can catch a measurement on it. Probably take you a little while before you elect to use this rubber band method before you can catch them without them popping all over the place, but you know, it's a thing you get used to pretty quick. So, all right. Spoiler alert, I'm just going to go with this one, even if it's a little bit off in size. I'm not going to keep cutting this thing. It's still a little more than 6 inches, but I'm going to go with it. And then I'm going to check and see how big it's going to be with my patterns, with my accent pieces in here. It's going to make it quite a bit bigger, I'm sure. So I know that this might look a little tedious, but you know, this is just the figuring out process. So instead of me sitting with paper and pencil and calculators and formulas and all this other kind of stuff, this is kind of just applying relative measurement to the segmenting game. So it takes a little bit to get this part set up, but then once this is done, then you know, the rest of it goes pretty easily. So now this is the new size of our feature ring, and as you can see, it makes that pattern right there. Okay? Yeah, whatever. Yeah, that was not great. I'm going to put this back together so I can take a quick measurement, then I can roll because I'm going to have to make the next, I'm going to cut this ring, my feature ring, I'm going to cut this size, but then the next ring is actually going to have to be larger. Or, is that right? Larger. Yeah. I think the segments will have to be a little bit larger, but we'll see. Okay. You need a bigger ruler. Okay, so this ring actually ended up being something closer to 7¼ inches, which is fine. I can live with that. So now I'm going to show you the material we're going to use to make our feature ring. So I'm going to set this aside. And this is some, this is ambrosia maple and walnut. And I basically laminated on a thin piece, a little over 1/8 inch of walnut onto this maple. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut half of these segments. Probably going to just make 2 feature rings. I think that would be the easiest way to go. And I'm going to put some of these segments with the walnut piece up and some with the walnut piece down, which is going to make a pattern once this all gets put together. So let's go ahead and get this going. So I'm going to have to do the same thing where I measure. I'm going to have to do the same thing where I measure or mark one face, mark the 2 adjacent faces, so I can keep track of how to line these things up once I get the segments cut. So let's see. With this accent piece, you got to be careful because you want to make sure you get your situation right. So what I want is I want to have this stripe on the front. So there we go. I don't have a side I prefer, so let's go ahead and mark it. Alright, and then mark the face. You don't have to worry about these marks. You really could use a Sharpie if you wanted to, which would make it a lot easier to see once you cut the pieces apart, because we're going to cut all this. We're going to cut the surface away on all these pieces, so you don't have to worry about the marking it up and all that kind of thing. So here we go. Make sure I got my blade up high enough. Nope. Raise that up a little bit. And then this is going to be exactly the same way that we did the plywood test piece. We're going to go through and we're going to cut 16 rings, and then we're going to put it together with the walnut pieces in the middle, and then you'll get a chance to see the pattern. Yeah. So let's get it. Now with this piece, I'm going to cut it. I really should have, with this second piece, I should have marked the bottom instead of the top. Let me grab an eraser and correct that real quick. Because I want to have, so the pattern that I'm looking for, what I want is to have it like that, or actually like that. So that every time you go around, you'll get this up and down kind of wave type pattern going on in the piece. So that's going to be our accent ring. And I don't really think it matters, but I'm going to cut 2 of these just in case. So that I'm going to cut 2 of these just in case it matters where the top mark is. So I'm going to put this set over here. And I'm going to erase this mark off of here and mark the other side. And then we're going to go. I don't know that this really matters. I don't think it does, but I'm just going to be proactive here and take care of it now just in case. I'm also planning on making 2 of these anyway, because if it comes out awesome, I know my wife's going to want to keep it. So that way I can provide one to my buddy's wife, and I can provide one to my wife and keep everybody happy. So the marking the wrong side, you know, you guys can skip that part if you're going to try this at home. Alright, so I'm going to mark this side instead. Which really I didn't have to mark it because this side's got walnut on it. But anyway, so the first, I marked this little block right here, and the marks are showing that, you know, forward and the fence, so that I know which angle was the first angle I cut, which is down here on the bottom, so that I can cut these in the same order. Again, I don't know that it matters, but just in case, you know, I want to be covered. So one more thing I want to mention, while you're making these cuts, you want to make sure that you're not, that no debris is accumulating here, because if you have debris in there, you can negatively affect the angle that you're cutting by adding a few degrees. So you want to make sure that you're checking that as you go, that you're not collecting debris along the fence. So now that I have that, woo, man, that's way time has flown by. So I'm gonna take this out of the way. So I guess what we're gonna do is just cut this. We're gonna take care of this feature ring for this video, and then I'll take care of the other rings, which is basically more of the same. And I'll take care of the rest of the rings and get them glued up, and so that then next time we won't have to worry about that. So what I'm going to do now is separate these out. I'm going to do the same to the other one. Actually, I'm going to check it and see if it even makes a difference, because maybe it doesn't even make a difference. Maybe I can just use this one ring and just flip the pieces over and still get a good result. And I'm also going to show you what to do in the case that you get a ring that has gaps in it, because that's a real easy fix as well. Okay, so let's get all this stuff out of the way. I cut one too many, and typical. Alright, so let's get this thing put together. Clear a little space. Here we go. So what I'm gonna do is I'm try to alternate them and see if that makes any difference at all. Hopefully it won't. As long as I get these front marks right. So this one doesn't have one, so this one does. Doesn't. Does. Doesn't. Does. Doesn't. Alright, let's see what we got. It's my container of rubber bands here. I use a lot of rubber bands when I'm doing this. So let's go ahead and put this on here. Now you can also use the rubber bands as clamps if you want to. And I do that from time to time, and it does do a good job. You want to make sure if you're going to do that you use a multitude of rubber bands. You don't want to just go with one. You want to put 3 or 4 of them around the outside of your piece. So let's put these little extra pieces in there and we can take a look at what our feature ring is going to look like. Get a little preview. So just open up these segments here and pop that in there. Now, here's the great thing about segmented turning. If you've ever tried to turn a bowl or anything where you have to cut that transition between the side wall and between the side walls of a piece and the bottom, the end grain is always tricky. Well, with segmented turning, we're not turning any of the end grain, because with these insert pieces, these inlay pieces, the end grain goes vertical. And with the side pieces, the end grain's getting glued to each other, so those surfaces are concealed. The only thing that you actually are going to be cutting is the side grain on the outside. It's going to make for the smoothest cutting experience you've ever experienced. Huh, I wonder what I did with the rest of those. Well, they're in my sample piece. Duh. This is a really basic pattern. You can get much fancier. I wasn't sure what kind of, how much of this we'd be able to get done in the, well, what is intended to be an hour for this live show. So I didn't want to get too fancy with it. I just wanted to show you just how easy it is to create a real simple pattern without going through a lot of planning and things like that. Cosmin asks if you get to wait for the glue to dry. No, that'll be between the shows. But so you can kind of get an idea now for. Wait a minute. I need to maybe move this way. Yeah. So you can get an idea now of what that pattern is going to look like when it's done. And the field tile is going to be maple. So the rest of the majority of the rest of this piece is going to be maple. So I said that I was going to tell you how I was going to talk to you about how to deal with a ring that's not that doesn't have a good fit, like you have gaps in there or whatever. This one doesn't have any gaps, but in the case that you did, so we have these inlay pieces in here, and you probably want to take those out. Take the two middle ones out. So let's do that now. And that's actually going to show a gap because the camera angle is kind of weird. All right. So I took these two out, which are these two are opposites. Let me see if I can. Okay. So these two would be exactly opposite of each other, and I took those out. And I'm going to simulate as if I had gaps in here somewhere. So then what I would do is take those two out, and then I would take a dowel, and I would insert the dowel in there from opposite sides. And what's going to happen is that dowel, because it's round, it's going to allow these pieces, see if I have two that I can use to show, it's going to allow these two pieces, here's another piece of dowel here, to be able to pivot around each other, right? So even if it was, I'm going to exaggerate the angle a little bit, even if it was like that, then this dowel is going to take up that space in the middle and allow it to straighten itself out according to the other half, the associated half of the segment of the ring. And then that will keep all of these joints nice and tight because the dowel is going to allow these segments to adjust to the shortcoming in whichever segment has the bad angle. And so what you would do is you glue this up this way, and then once the glue dries, then what you do is take this over to a sander. You could either put sandpaper on the table saw surface, any kind of flat surface in your shop. You could put sandpaper on your table saw, or you could take it to a disc sander, and basically what you do is you present the half to the sander across here, and what you do is sand that until it's flat. And then once it's flat, and once both of these are flat, then you can go back and put your inlay pieces back in. You can go and you can glue the whole thing back together, but you got to make sure that you remember to put your inlay pieces back in. And then that would be how you would be able to work around gaps in your segmented ring. And that's whether you cut the segments with a miter gauge or however you cut your segments. If it comes up and the angles are off a little bit, using that dowel trick is going to help to resolve that problem for you and get you to have a ring with nice tight fitting joints. And it does make a very, very slight appearance in the final product, but the only people that are going to know are other wood turners, you and other wood turners, and most of the time it's very, very difficult to tell. So don't fret too much if that happens to you. So anyway, let me switch back to this other camera over here. Turn this back on. Okay, so I guess that's where we're at so far. I'm going to show you the clamps that I use to glue the ring up. Let's see, it's almost 8:30. I won't even bother going through the gluing process. So let me grab those clamps and I'll show you those. Okay, so I got a whole bunch of these, different sizes. And don't worry if you can't find big ones. What I did, this is actually two. I think these are two 4-inch. Yeah, these are two 4.5-inch pipe clamps, strap clamps, whatever you want to call it. And basically, what I did is just opened them up, and I fed the end of one into this, the end of one into the other twice. And you can do this as many. You can combine as many of these as possible as you need to get whatever size you need. And then basically what I do after that is I just go ahead and put, let's see. So basically after that, I just go ahead and I put glue in there. And then a lot of times I'll go ahead and use a rubber band kind of just to give it some structure, to make it easier. And then I go ahead and put these on and tighten these up. And then I let it dry overnight usually. And then I'm going to take it to the sander, to the drum sander, and level it off, which is what we'll be doing next week. I'll have these glued up by then, and I'll have the rest of the rings cut. Yeah. I'll have the rest of the rings cut, and I'll have them ready to go into the sander, and then I'll show you how I glue them up. I'm not really sure exactly how I'm going to break these up because this is kind of I don't know, it's a little bit of a complicated process to share on live, and so we're just going to figure out how best to do that together over the course of the next couple of weeks. So I know this was a little wordy, but I wanted to try to go through it and explain the process, and explain the little accessories and things, and show you that you can make your own jigs to get this done, and you can end up with really nice fitting rings like this very easily. So, alright, so I hope that this was helpful to some and entertaining to others. But I don't see too many questions. Melinda asked, where do I find such large rubber bands? Actually, these are not very, these are pretty regular, these are pretty normal sized, these ones. I got these from Office Depot, maybe an office supply store. It may have even been Walmart. And then I went back out and I got, for my bigger bowls, I went out and bought these huge rubber bands here. They're kind of thin, kind of narrow, but they do the job. And I have quite a few of them, so like I said, use a multitude of them if you're going to use them as clamps. But the rubber bands really help to keep things in place when you go to put your pipe clamps on. Keep things from sliding all over the place on you. So, and I think, let's see if I got any more questions in there. Nope. So, I'm sorry, Cosmin, that you don't get to watch the glue dry. I hope you weren't really looking forward to that, but there you go. And again, thanks everybody for joining me in the shop today. Like I said, I'm going to be in South Carolina the first full week of October at Man Tools. I'll be there the Monday and Tuesday. The first Tuesday and the following Wednesday of October. I'll be there doing some demos for Robert Sorby. So if you're in the area and you can get free during the day, feel free to stop by and check me out. I'll be doing some demos, and I'll probably have some stickers and different things with me. And if you can come by, I'd be glad to hook you up with that. So anyway, again, thank you for joining me in the shop, and remember, dreadnought and make something. Peace. Still shooting for that smooth transition out. One day.